Hello students, and welcome to our instrument departure procedures execution video. Before we jump into the cockpit, let's quickly discuss the objective of this maneuver and some key factors that we'll be focusing on. An instrument departure procedure is a way for pilots to transition from the departure airport after takeoff to the IFR en route flight structure in instrument meteorological conditions, or IMC. In this maneuver execution video, we will not be covering detailed aerodynamics, maneuver diagrams, common student errors, or the ACS standards. This video is to simply explain and demonstrate the execution of the maneuver and will vary based on the aircraft you are flying. To see all of the additional details we just mentioned and to study this lesson's full-length presentation, podcast, diagrams, flashcards, lesson quiz, and a whole bunch more, look up the Instrument Departure Procedures lesson on our website at wificfi.com. Lastly, before we jump into the cockpit, there are a couple of key things that we need to cover. Today, we will be executing the EMONT 2 obstacle departure procedure from the Ogden, Utah airport, and we will be departing from runway 21. Now, for your studies, we highly suggest this because it will be very beneficial to pull up this departure procedure chart either online, through ForeFlight, or through another flight planning app to somehow pull this up on the side, whether it's your iPad, your phone, another computer screen, whatever it may be, so that you can follow along with the chart as you watch us fly it here in this video. Again, it's the EMONT 2 obstacle departure procedure from the Ogden, Utah airport. Ogden is KOGD. We will begin our example on runway 21, and prior to our departure, we will go ahead and brief the procedure. We will also already have the departure procedure built into our GPS that we will be using for our navigation. Now, with this departure procedure, you could also navigate with VORs using the OGD or the Ogden VOR, but we're going to go ahead and use the GPS today. The reason that we'll already have this built in is because it does take quite a bit of time to build this departure procedure on the G1000, especially in the flight simulator, and we don't want to just have you sitting there watching us build it. Also, the second reason is because not all airplanes are equipped with G1000 instrumentation, meaning that these procedural steps that we're going to complete before we start the video will vary based on the avionics that you're actually using in your training aircraft. Lastly, we're going to assume that ATC has already cleared us for this procedure and that they have instructed us to climb and maintain 8,000 feet after our departure. So that's what we'll bug, and that's what we'll be climbing up to. We're going to cover the rest of the airplane, so let's head out there and fly this departure procedure. Alright students, welcome out to our airplane for us to fly this EMONT 2 obstacle departure procedure. Again, if you have it pulled up, you can follow along with us as we fly the departure for you. We're here, runway 21, and we're going to be departing off of this runway and doing the departure procedure. I'm going to show you how we have the plane set up before we go ahead and take off. As long as you do as much as you can before you take off for the departure procedure, then they're really not that difficult to fly. There's a lot of setup, but once the aircraft is set up, it's not that difficult. Now, if you're trying to fly the departure while setting everything up simultaneously, it can become very overwhelming and very difficult to maintain your headings, your altitudes, your courses, while also trying to deal with your avionics. So as long as you can get as much set up beforehand as possible, the better you're going to be while you're out flying the maneuver. So that's why we have so much set up here. Okay, let's go ahead and brief the departure procedure, and then I'll show you how we've got it all set up. So this is the EMONT 2 departure, obstacle departure for Ogden, Utah. Our frequency is 118.7 for Ogden Tower. We can see that right here, and 121.1 for Salt Lake Approach. We've got that in our backup, so we can swap that over once we get swapped from Ogden Tower to Salt Lake departure. Our takeoff minimums for runway for departing off of runway 21 are standard takeoff minimums. Our route description is we're going to go ahead and depart runway 21. We're going to climb straight ahead to 400 feet AGL, which is 4,900 feet MSL. We'll then go ahead and continue our climb in a turn to heading 250. So you can see I've gone ahead and bugged heading 250 right here. to intercept the 221 radio from the Ogden VOR. I've tuned in the Ogden VOR 115.7 for our nav 1. We've hit our CDI, so we're on VOR 1, and I've put our course in of 221. Everything's all set up. So we're going to take off, we're going to turn right, continue our climb on heading 250 to intercept the 221 radio from the Ogden VOR. We're then going to go ahead and follow this 221 radio out to the Emont intersection, which is 18 DME from the Ogden VOR, at which point we could either continue our climb in the holding pattern or depart along our route of flight. That's going to depend on our altitude, you know, if we're at the MEA or if we've gotten different instructions from ATC. That'll depend on a whole bunch of different things. So we'll just go ahead and cut the video at that point, because that'll be part of, you know, other videos that we do in the future. Here, we're just getting our takeoff, we're doing our departure, heading out to Emont, and that's going to be the extent of our departure procedure. That being said, as you can see, I've got so much set up here, right? I've got our frequencies in, we've got our VOR in. Now I know that we said that we were going to do this with the GPS, but we actually decided to do it with the VOR just because the GPS wasn't pulling up the departure procedure correctly. So we're going to be doing it with the VOR, which is great. But where was I? Yeah, so we got our frequencies in, we've got our navigation frequencies in, our comm frequencies in, we've got our altitude bugged, we're going to be climbing to 8,000 feet. We've got our heading bugged, our initial heading of 250 after we take off. Remember that climbing right turn to 250. We've got the Ogden VOR put in, we've got the course we're going to intercept, which is 221, and then we're just going to go ahead and fly that outbound. Basically, everything's set up. So now all we got to do is talk to ATC and focus on flying the maneuver. Once we get airborne, I'm going to jump to this view. Now you can see it's a nice, beautiful day, but again, we're going to be simulating that we're in instrument conditions. So once we get airborne, we're going to go ahead and switch to this view, and we're just going to fly this departure procedure with our instruments only. Just wanted to show you kind of what that looks like. Here, Ogden Tower will go ahead and tell us you're cleared for takeoff, runway 21, climb and maintain 8,000 feet on the Emont 2 departure. So we'd say, all right, cleared for takeoff. We'll go ahead and bring our power up, and we'll begin our takeoff. Airspeed is alive. We're going to rotate at 55 knots and climb at our VY of 74. There's 55. We'll go ahead and start our rotation. And then begin to pitch and trim for that 74 knots as we climb out. Just straight ahead first until we get about 400 feet into the air. Alright, we are going to go ahead and say goodbye to our beautiful outside world, as we now are just going to focus while flying our instruments. Ogden Tower would then go ahead and switch us over to Salt Lake approach, say contact Salt Lake departure or whatever on 121.1, say okay. So we'd switch over 121.1. We'd tell Salt Lake departure, hey, this is Cessna Wi-Fi CFI. We're on the Emont 2 departure, 5,000 feet, climbing 8,000, and then they'd have some instructions for us. So now that we're a couple hundred feet above the runway, let's go ahead and make our turn over to our heading, 250. Continue our climb all the way up to that 8,000. But we're going to go to heading at 250 right here. And we're going to stay right here in this on this heading, keep climbing at our VY speed until we intercept that 221 radio from the Ogden VOR, that green CDI line that we have set up. Even a little bit turbulent today, kind of like it would be in real clouds. Making that realistic for us. Again, remember when you're flying in instrument conditions, everything's just nice and smooth. Smooth banks left and right, smooth pitch. Don't do anything too sharp or abrupt, just because you will quickly lose control of the aircraft if you do make sharp, abrupt changes. We'd also do our after takeoff check here, so if we're flipping off our landing lights, you know, whatever. Once you're nice and stable, you can go ahead and do your after takeoff checklist. Readjusting your mixture, if you had flaps in, retracting your flaps. I know we kind of skipped over that. We go over all of those different things in our takeoff lessons in the VFR portion of our flight maneuver video, so we're not really focusing on that here on the IFR parts, but you would do, you know, your after takeoff checklist. Got about 500 feet to go to our altitude. Still climbing at our VY, still watching our heading. 200 feet to our altitude. 100 feet. Now let's go ahead and start to kind of trim the nose down just a little bit. Hold some forward pressure. I like to allow the aircraft to speed up before I pull the power back a little bit and then retrim it. Otherwise, sometimes these smaller planes have a hard time speeding up. Down just a little bit. Let's go and bring our power back now. Do a good cruise setting. Maybe we get about 2400 RPM. So for our cruise, retrim. Now we're just going to be making small adjustments to stay on our altitude. 8,000 feet, still on our heading. At this point, you could go ahead and do your cruise checklist. I could be opening cow flaps if you had them, readjusting your mixture, all those different things. Again, we're just going to keep flying this heading of 250 until our VOR needle starts to come in for us, at which point we'll intercept radial 221 from the Ogden VOR. Using our scanning techniques, we're watching our airspeed, our altitude, our attitude indicator, our heading, vertical speed indicator, we're bouncing back and forth on all these things. You can see that our VOR needle is now starting to come in, so that is fantastic. Wait for it to get a little closer, and then we'll turn to follow the head of that VOR needle once we get a little closer to intercepting it. Okay, make a nice gentle turn over. I like to sync up my heading bug when I make these turns to kind of remember which heading I was flying on in case things get busy. Bring in maybe a little more power too. And that's basically it. We would just, you know, go ahead and fly this out to that 18 DME where we could do the hold. I'm actually just going to kick on the autopilot while I chat for a sec. Where we could do either the hold or we could depart if we were at our right MEA. You know, ATC could tell us to depart one direction or another, or if we're not high enough, we could enter hold, which we're not going to do that here in this video because we've got a whole nother video coming up soon that is going to be completely dedicated to holds and holding procedures. But ATC could tell us to depart on our altitude or on our en route course, right? Or we could enter the hold and do that, depending on a whole bunch of different factors. But that's it. Again, just really want to emphasize probably the most important thing about this is having as much set up on the ground before you go and do your takeoff. Imagine trying to tune all those frequencies and set your courses, set your heading bugs, set your altitude bugs, briefing your your departure, doing all that while you're trying to maintain control of the airplane. Just makes it so much more difficult than it has to be. So get all that stuff done first, and then all you have to focus on is your, you know, just flying the airplane. Just staying on your heading, staying on your altitude. It makes it look crazy easy, but it's because we did so much setup in the beginning. So that's it for our instrument departure procedures lesson, guys. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on our next instrument lesson coming up soon.